To celebrate the 250th anniversary of the United States, the Freedom Plane National Tour is bringing the founding-era documents that forged a nation across the country. Well, the Freedom Plane has landed in Houston, Texas, and these documents are on display at our very own Houston Museum of Natural Science for a limited time and at no cost to visitors, thanks to the generous support of those listed in the podcast description. I'm your mental curator, Johnny Hemberger. In this episode of the HMNS Beyond Bones podcast, I was able to stand among the documents themselves with Freedom Plane curator Maureen MacDonald to discuss the momentous history and poignant context surrounding these priceless artifacts that changed the course of history. Maureen MacDonald, thank you so much for joining us on the Beyond Bones podcast today.
I'm happy to be here in Houston.
So you are a curator following these 9 documents around the country. Mm-hmm. First of all, how does it feel to be part of something so historic and so significant to our relatively young nation?
I feel honored to be part of this project. I think it's a great idea to bring the National Archives out to different places in the country, especially for the 250th anniversary.
Yeah, and so the bicentennial, 1976, I believe it was, 1776 plus 200, did that go around the country in a train? That was a little before my time, but that was
Yes, there was a train that went around and took different sorts of documents and other Americana around. It went around for a while. There was actually a precursor, a train in the 1940s, late 1940s as well, that took documents around the country for 2 years. So they've had 2 freedom trains in the 20th century. And so this is our modern take on that idea, but with a plane.
I was going to say that's what's so fascinating about it is as our country has grown and matured, even though it sounds weird to say, 250 years is, we're still figuring it out.
Yeah.
That's still a country very much figuring it out compared to older European countries and countries around the world. But the fact that when this all began, bringing these documents in Americana around the country, we were using the modes of transportation that were available. And for a long time, it was train.
Yeah.
Now,
and they could get on the train and go look at the documents. But with the plane, it got a little more complicated. Yeah. And so the plane is the way we're getting things around the country so that we can move it around and do multiple events, 8 different locations through August.
Right. So now we're obviously in Houston at the Houston Museum of Natural Science where these 9 documents are now located. Can we talk about what those 9 documents are? Starting in the corner here, I've already filmed a bunch of B-roll. Starting over here, can we start with what's going on over here?
The first one that we have on display, they go in chronological order around the room, is the Articles of Association. The Articles of Association was a response after the Boston Tea Party. England put a lot of tariffs on the country. Yeah. And so in response to that, they decided they were going to boycott British goods. And this is the document that was signed to do that. It has a lot of heavy hitters on there. Yeah. A lot of the same people will eventually sign the Declaration. It has George Washington, who didn't sign the Declaration because he was fighting the Revolutionary War. Yeah. But George Washington, John Adams, Sam Adams, Ben Franklin's on there. So you'll get to see a lot of founding fathers on there.
And I think it's kind of important for the sake of this podcast and any content that the museum is producing around this exhibit, we want to give you some juicy tidbits, but y'all will have to come out and really engulf yourself in this history on your own to fully absorb the significance of these documents. So what are the next 3? We have 3.
You're definitely going to want to come see the next 3 for sure, because they are oaths of allegiance signed by George Washington, Alexander Hamilton, and Aaron Burr. We've reunited Alexander Hamilton and Aaron Burr for this special exhibit.
That's so cool. I honestly, so before the podcast, I was getting my B-roll with my good camera because that's a once in a lifetime opportunity and access that we have here. I think those are my favorite.
They're up there on with my favorites as well.
That's the business right there. That's so cool. Those three signing it, there's their signatures on it. It's so amazing to be literally inches away from these documents. So let's move on to this biggest document in the collection. It is the biggest one.
Yeah. So in 1820, the government realized that the document was the original Declaration of Independence, which is on display in the Rotunda in Washington, D.C., was starting to fade. And so they decided they needed to make a copy. So they hired a man named William Stone. He basically took 3 years and carved a copper plate, a printing plate. And from that, this is one of the copies that was made. There were 200 made at the time. We know of about 50 that still exist today.
Wow.
But this is how we know what the document looks like today. This is what you see in textbooks. This is what we sell in our gift shop as a facsimile. So it's a very good representation of what the Declaration would look like if it was still legible.
Right, exactly. Sharp and clear. I think people have this misconception that the Declaration of Independence can just be moved around, not necessarily willy-nilly, but it can go here and there, to and fro. That parchment, is it parchment?
It's parchment.
Parchment.
Yeah.
It's so delicate, and the ink is, as you can imagine, quite faded and damaged by now for a reason that we'll get to in a moment. So you're right. When you see textbooks and things and you're looking at the Declaration of Independence, it's this one. It's this copy that we're looking at because this is the best, sharpest, most viable, visible copy that we have in existence. And so this is what's traveling around with us. Well, with y'all. I'm here on behalf of the Peanut Gallery, just gawking at how close to history I am. So my second favorite, other than the Oaths of Allegiance, Treaty of Paris, right here.
So the Declaration was our breakup letter with England. This is how we said we're no longer part of England. We're going out on our own. The Treaty of Paris, people think that we were done in 1776 when we started the war, but it didn't end until 1783 with the Treaty of Paris.
Right.
So you'll see the signatures of David Hartley, who was the British person negotiating the treaty. And then you have, again, heavy hitters. We have John Adams, Ben Franklin, and John Jay just above those wax seals that you'll see there.
The wax seals. And this is the document.
Yes, it is.
This is not
It's all of these are originals that you're going to see in person.
Absolutely. So this is the wax. And that's what blows my mind, is that wax is still very rich, vibrant.
Yeah, the color is terrific. And
other than the patina of the parchment, I assume it's still parchment at this point, or is this different material?
Yeah.
Okay. But the fact that the ink, the wax looks like it was pressed yesterday.
Yeah.
Looks like it was pressed this morning. It's so vibrant, and the ribbon going underneath it, the teal or blue ribbon at this point.
But that also says a lot about how we've taken care of the document.
Yes.
Light exposure, I mean, that's part of the reason the Declaration in Washington looks terrible is for 36 years it hung across from a window. And so that's light damage.
Yes.
Light is bad, which is why the lights down here are very low. Do you want to talk about that?
Let's put a pin on that. I very much do. My scientific brain very much wants to ask the question, why is light so important and so critical to manage around these documents? So let's put a pin in that just for a minute or two because I want to finish up.
You want to get through the documents.
Exactly. So what's next over here to
the
our
next one
left?
over there is, it is David Brearley's printed first version of the Constitution. So they were debating the Constitution over the summer. For 4 months, they debated the Constitution. And so they did a first printing of it to go through it and debate in the room. In August. And so that is one of the founding fathers from New Jersey, David Brearley's copy, the first page. And so you can see annotations on it. You can compare it with the original or the final version to see what changed.
Yeah.
So it's really interesting to have that here.
I might have
and something by a founding father holding it in his hands. So
right, and it's hard to pick a favorite in here. And I said, oh, that's my favorite. Oh, this is my favorite. Now, as you of course learn more and understand more, yes, this is one of my favorites, if not my favorite, and that might change as we go, because we're familiar with the Constitution in its final form and even the amendments to follow.
yeah.
This is what the founding fathers were sitting in a secret location, writing up. No, let's change that. That's not right. No. I like that, but let's change this. What if we do this? Then we're excluding this.
Yeah, you feel like you're in the room where it happened.
Right.
So.
Their scribbles are on this. Their scribbles are in the annotations in the ledger that we'll talk about next to it. This isn't the Constitution. This is what led to the Constitution.
Yeah.
This is you can almost feel their neurons.
They're getting
in their
closer
brain
and closer.
firing.
So this is the first version. There was a second version, and then the final was completed in September 17th, 1787. So
Wow.
that's Constitution Day.
Yeah. Pardon me for getting a little bit silent as I become, a little overwhelmed with the gravity, the gravitas of the room we're in and what we're surrounded by. Can you explain this ledger right next to it?
So the ledger is the vote tally for the Constitution. So we're keeping track of the votes so they'd know when it passed. One line will definitely be blank, and that was for Rhode Island. They did not want to pass the Constitution without a Bill of Rights.
Yeah.
And so they abstained from voting on it. So
that seems pretty smart to me. Let's wait for a Bill of Rights.
Well, there was a whole faction of founding fathers that really wanted a Bill of Rights, but they also knew that it was sort of bogging down getting the completion of the Constitution done.
Right.
And so they tabled it for later, and they did do it a couple of years later.
Yeah.
So
that's so fascinating.
But Rhode Island held out.
Yeah, it wasn't necessarily. It's different than a filibuster, but you needed all the colonies present or representatives from there to go to the next step or ratify or whatever you needed to do next.
Yeah, they passed without Rhode Island there. It's because they could do that, but yeah.
Very fascinating. Now the last document on display.
The last document is the Senate markup of the Bill of Rights. This is a cool document. So most people think of the Bill of Rights as the first 10 amendments to the Constitution. On there, you'll see 12, well, actually 17, and they marked it down to 12. So you can see, again, the same thing where they're editing down the text. And what ends up being are 12 that get sent out to the states for ratification.
Right.
So what's in the rotunda for the National Archives is the version that was sent out to the states.
Yeah.
And then when they went out to vote on it, only 10 of them passed. So the first 2 did not pass. Right. The first one had to do with number of constituents per congressperson. If that one had passed, we'd have about 6,700 congresspeople today. We have 435, so it would be a huge difference.
Right.
And the second one had to do with congressional pay, and it basically said you couldn't give yourself a pay raise anytime you wanted. If you're going to do it, it had to be at the beginning of a session of Congress. And that one didn't pass then, but interestingly enough, it passed 200 years later and became the 27th Amendment.
Yeah.
So what we consider the First Amendment, freedom of speech, freedom of religion, freedom of the press, is number 3. And then 3 to 12 are the first 10 amendments that we know of.
That is so unbelievably
So you can see how they discussed the language, and they combined some of them together to consolidate to 12. That was what was sent out to the states. So,
wow.
Yeah.
Living history.
Yeah.
It's
so there's a lot of story
history.
just looking at that document.
Absolutely. And again, we can't do a podcast long enough to cover every jot and tittle of these documents, and these aren't even all the documents.
No.
These are just 9 pieces of the original the founding documents that shaped our nation, because I'd imagine there are dozens, if not hundreds, of different important articles.
We have over 13.5 billion pieces of paper in the National Archives.
I was way off.
Just slightly. Yeah,
Just
13.5 billion. It's all spread out around the country, but yes.
I was way off.
Yeah.
Okay, so wow, we could go on just about these documents forever. If you haven't noticed, if you're watching this on YouTube, which I very highly recommend you watch this version of the podcast on YouTube, but also, of course, be audio. But if you're watching, there is very limited amount of light in here. I have had to crank my camera settings up basically as high as they can go. You might see a little bit of noise in the image, but as they say, it comes with the territory, and it's completely understandable. Because light, we touched on this earlier, light is so critical to the preservation of these documents. Can we go back to the Constitution that sits at the Capitol and why we needed to make this copy here
the Declaration.
Of the Declaration of Independence, excuse me.
Yeah.
And what happened to the original Declaration of Independence?
So I like to say that the original Declaration was well loved and got shown a lot. So it's naturally started to fade because of exposure to light and just people viewing it.
Yeah.
So that's why they hired William Stone to make the copy in 1820. But even after that, the Declaration got a lot of exposure. It was subjected to the War of 1812. So Washington burned in 1814.
Yeah.
The Declaration, not this one, but the one in Washington, all the documents were taken by a clerk at the State Department and hidden in Virginia until the danger was over, because they feared that they would have been burned.
Yeah.
So they were moved around.
Right.
And in the late 1800s, somebody at State Department framed the Declaration and then hung it across from a window for 36 years.
Wow.
So the damage you see there, because if you go to Washington, it is quite faded. It's really hard to read. And that is because of light exposure. And when you go into the rotunda these days, the lights are low, and the temperature is always nice and cool in there, and that's to protect them because they're out 363 days a year.
Yeah.
And we need them to last for a very long time.
So the reason why light is so limited, even when we walked in here, we wanted to set up just one camera light, and we're instantly told, shut it off, no light. It is so strictly
the light
monitored.
that's in here is the amount that is needed. So
and it's artistic and it's poignant, really, to have it kind of in this kind of limited spotlight, and the rest of the room is a bit dark. It's almost presented. We have a gem hall nearby where we present our gems in a very similar fashion. They're also sensitive to the elements and too much light exposure and things like that.
Right.
Can you speak scientifically or chemically what the light does to these parchments?
Well, first I'll say that everything we measure in here it can't be more than 5 candles. So the equivalent of if you had 5 candles in like this case or whatever, that's the amount of light. So we were literally measuring to make sure that they were not over 5 candles in here. So that's the basic standard for our documents, is they can't be over 5 candles.
Because the light
will start to fade them.
Right.
And other things, humidity also is a factor. You live in a very humid place.
Yes.
And then the temperature is plus or minus 70.
Okay.
So the documents are happier in those conditions.
Yes, and they last longer, and we want them to last as
so
long
we can
as humanly possible.
take them out, hopefully, for the 300th someday. I won't be me.
Yes.
But
it makes you wonder, what the country will look like in 300 years. We're not getting political at all here, but like I mentioned earlier, we're still a baby country. There are buildings
and if
older.
we're flying the documents now, I wonder how they'll be getting around the country if they do it again.
They're working on like quantum teleportation, so maybe. Now, I don't think you test quantum teleportation with something so significant as these documents. But who knows? 50 years, who knows what will be available to us.
Yeah.
What technology? It's just so fascinating, and this is how we'll kind of wrap up with this idea that we live in ever-evolving times. Our country, though it is young, is always changing because it's built on this lofty promise that's been paid for with suffering, paid for with sacrifice, and all of these things towards the progress of this great experiment. And these are this is one of the locations, the rare opportunities in life, especially as an American, to connect with what it means, to try to touch grass, as the kids say, with what it means to be American.
Yeah.
This promise set before us And what will the future look like as we try to make good on that promise?
And also the sacrifices they made to have the country we have today.
Yes.
They were traitors to England. That was a very brave thing for them to do, to get us here where we are today.
I always try to think of things or explain things in a succinct way, which sounds crazy because I talk a lot on the podcast. But I would explain this exhibit to me in 2 words: somber and promising. You remember where we've come, and you think about the promise of the future. Mm-hmm. And there's no better location at the moment to dwell on that than right here.
Yeah. So you got to come down and check it out.
Maureen, thank you so much for coming on the Beyond Bones podcast.
You're welcome. This has been a pleasure.
Thank you so much for listening to the HMNS Beyond Bones podcast. I've been your mental curator, Johnny Hemberger. We cannot express enough gratitude to Maureen MacDonald for her time and expertise, nor can we possibly convey how grateful we are to the sponsors and supporters in the podcast description for their humbling generosity. Be sure to follow, rate, and comment on the HMNS Beyond Bones podcast if you haven't already. We can't wait to see you here at the Houston Museum of Natural Science. So until next time, as always, stay safe and stay curious.